Software Engineering Radio Episode 24, Development Processes Part 1.
Hi everybody. This episode has Arno and Alex on the microphones, and we're going to speak about development processes. There were actually quite a lot of listeners giving us the feedback that they would like to hear about development processes, and so we at last got down to actually talking about this and having this topic in an episode. So, Alex, what will we actually be covering in this episode?
First of all, we will talk about why we need development processes, what are they for. Later on, we will get a bit process theory, the very basics, what process types are there, and the foundations to speak about process theory. We will not talk about actual development process in this episode. We will save this for later episodes because every development process I can think of, for example, extreme programming or rational unified process is so huge that we can easily fill a whole episode with it. So we leave this out today and speak only about the very basics.
So this is sort of the introductory episode to development processes. And then we will cover different aspects, different concrete processes, and different things in later episodes, go into more detail and probably, react to feedback we get anyway, but look at the mainstream processes.
Exactly.
So let's start by looking at what actually is a development process. What is it composed of, and what are the key aspects?
Well, very simple. Development process actually says how a team of software developers or other roles together build software. So it's about teams, how they work together for building software. Therefore, software development process usually defines roles that says what people can do or what they have to do, and artifacts, the things they produce, and of course the process steps which define what will be done at what point in time in the development. So it's about working together and doing software development together.
Well, but playing devil's advocate, I mean, me and my friends get down, we sit down together, have this great idea for a new software product, make it open source, we get together and just start coding. What do we need a process for? Why don't you just dig into things?
Yeah.
Creating all these artifacts and that sort of thing sounds like overhead. Why do we need it?
Yeah. Well, first of all, maybe it's a bit a kind of people argue about if every development team has a process or not, or if you have to have a defined process, a written down process to have a process. So I don't want to argue if it's a process just when it's written down, but the important thing is when a team works together, you have to define how you work together. And the problem is, or becomes much harder the larger the team gets, actually. I mean, if your example, when two developers work together, you don't have to write down when you have to do what, of course, because you just talk about it and then do it. So, it gets more complicated the larger the team size gets, actually. And
so actually development processes are more important the larger the teams get. But are they important for small teams as well?
They are important for small teams too, in my opinion, at least. But they get more important for larger teams. I mean, for smaller teams, you also have the communication problems or you can have communication problems. You have maybe problems who has to do what and when. So you define it either way. I mean, you don't have to use extreme programming or rational unified process for this thing, but you usually talk together and then define, okay, I do the testing, I check out when you have done this and that. So you usually define processes even if you don't or write them down as formal things. Another important aspect on this thing is, for me, good development processes are also, kind of best practices. You can Look at extreme programming, for example, the whole unit testing and test-driven development thing that are best practices developers have created over the years. So a development process, even for small teams, can introduce best practices to your team. So yes, it's important for a small team too, in my opinion.
So this sounds like the culture that is there can be formalized into a process, and in a healthy project, the culture and the process are sort of the same thing. And people just wrote down the way things are done, the way things have proven to work well, and that in the end was the process. Would you say that is a
definition? Yeah, very nice definition, actually. Yeah.
Okay, well, looking at processes this way, it's sort of obvious that it's good to have them, or, well, at least we think they're helpful. But what do you think? Why are there so many developers who do not like processes, for whom development process is sort of like a red flag, something they try to avoid, they try to work around, that sort of thing?
Yeah. For me, the main problem is that actually a lot of projects use the wrong process for their project, which has many roots, of course. One of the common faults is that external department, the process department, special process department, defines how to program, how processes should like, and they usually don't know exactly how developers work or how it's best for them to work. And also they define one process for all the projects you have in your company, and of course the projects are different. So often the process don't fit very, very well. Another thing
but isn't that sort of an automatic thing that happens? I mean, processes are sort of out of the box. You get them shrink wrapped, and I mean, if you start a software project, you usually do not have the time to think up your own new process. So, what would be the alternative?
There are different ways to approach this, actually, and in my opinion, this is one of the huge breakthroughs we have done in the last 5 to 10 years in process world. I mean, much earlier, you really did this way. You had one process and you had to fit your project to the process, which of course didn't work. Right now we have we know that this doesn't work. So the different solutions for this are, for example, extreme programming defines very strictly where it fits. So, you can look at your project and judge afterwards, is extreme programming the right process for me? Another way is how the rational unified process does it. It's like a toolbox. I mean, no one really uses, or you shouldn't use, rational unified process with all the things that come with it. Every time you do a project with rational unified process, you have to pick out the tools out of the toolbox that fits to your project. So you have to customize the project, the process.
Preach that. I mean, these sort of process frameworks need to be tailored for each project, but especially for rational unified process, it's hardly ever done in my experience. Or many companies say, well, great, rational unified process defines 247 artifacts, I think. So we need all these, and it becomes bogged down. Definitely. I think that would really help to discard all the things that are not helpful for the concrete project. Yeah, that sounds like a good approach.
Yeah, and exactly, the rational unified process is even worse in this situation because it is artifact driven by its design. So as you said, you usually end up with projects who just do any kind of documentation and architecture artifacts and whatever, but have no time left to actually program. So to address this, one of the process experts I like very much, Alistair Coburn, defined or used another way for his crystal process family. So he defines a family of development processes, and you just look at your project. You have some guidelines like project size or criticality for life critical projects are different from e-commerce projects or whatever. And afterwards pick one of the processes out of his crystal process family, that fits best. So you don't have to start at, zero base like Russian Unified project where you have everything in there. You have a closer starting point to your actual project, which is a nice idea, I think.
Well, given these formalized approaches to developing software, I often heard and read about the opinion that software development should become more and more repeatable, sort of controlled. Everyone knows what they are doing, and if you spend enough effort to set up your process, to train the people, you will be able to predict with a high accuracy when the project will be finished, how many bugs there will be left. And, well, there's this keyword of industrialization of software development. What do you think about that?
Yeah. Very, very important thing. I don't think it works at all. It's the wrong metaphor. And we have to dive a bit deeper into process theory, as said in the beginning. If you look at process theory, there are two kinds of processes, actually. There are defined processes and empiric processes. The defined processes are actually repeatable. So they basically say you have the same input, use the same process, and you will get the same output. It's a bit like assembly line thinking. You get what I mean? The process actually defines the working product.
Now, when you're speaking about processes, you mean the abstract concept of a process. It's not necessarily software, but just some input, some processing, some output, right?
Some development process. I mean, you use, for example, the RUP again. You just give the same input and you use the same development process, RUP, for example, and you will get the defined same output, as you said in your question.
Well, but that never happens for software.
Exactly.
I mean, no two development teams would come up with the same design, for example.
Exactly. And that is the huge misconception. Software development is not a defined process. Software development is an empiric process, which is, well, not the opposite, but the other kind of processes you have. And empiric processes are actually for more complex stuff where you have feedback loops and where actually the process is not the only or the defining key variable in producing the output. I mean, you think of designs, think of product development, whatever. You have always processes where people are important, where creativity is important, where communication is important, and random things, actually. I mean, every software developer knows you can't produce the same code twice day after day. Just you have different influences all over the day, so it looks different every time you do it. So that's an empiric process, and that's why the industrialization and assembly line metaphor doesn't work. Assembly lines work for defined processes, not for empiric processes, actually.
But then what about these formalization things like CMM or ISO 9000 series of standardization? I mean, the highest CMM levels, for example, they sort of try to achieve repeatability.
Yeah.
What do you think of them?
Same here. I guess we should do a whole episode on CMMI, actually, because it's a very complex thing, and there you have this continuous model and this stage model. So a lot to say about that. But basically, I don't think the idea works. A lot of things CMMI defines are great. There are best practices in there. You should do every good project actually should do the things, or a lot of things CMMI defines. But the idea that just when you do this, you get good software, or you get software fast enough or repeatable or with lesser bugs or whatever is wrong, because you can just get a bunch of idiots and let them do CMMI 5 and you won't get any software out. So the idea of repeatable software development just through process quality assurance is actually wrong. It just works for defined processes and not for empiric. So it's a bit complicated, the CMMI thing. You see, I mean, the techniques are actually good, but the philosophy is not so good, or it's wrong, actually, in my opinion.
Okay, well, from all of this, I get the impression that you don't really like this metaphor of software development as an assembly line. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's the completely wrong metaphor, in my opinion. And it's dangerous because you get the idea of repeatability, and people don't matter, and qualification doesn't matter, and creativity doesn't matter, and communication, whatever. All the things that, at least in my opinion, are the key factors, the most important factors, are not important in this metaphor. So, it's really dangerous. And, it's not, I mean, look at car manufacturers, for example. There is also a defined and an empiric process in building cars. The defined processes are the ones where the cars are assembled on the assembly line, actually. So these are defined and repeatable processes, and it's not so important what people do these things. It's just, you can do the quality assurance on the process and your product gets fine, at least. So, and then you have the part front up where the car is actually designed, where someone thinks about how the car looks like, what are the engines, where is the engine, all this development stuff. And this kind of processes running there at development of the car are actually empiric processes again, like software development. And if you look at these parts in every branch, at least I know, the people work different. They don't assure the quality by quality assurance of the process. They do increments. They get feedbacks from customers, and they do prototypes, a lot of prototyping work. So empiric processes are different from defined processes. And I think you have to really understand this issue before you get into software development process. Otherwise, you get out with some process that don't work simply.
Okay, well, this sounds like creative work has empiric processes, and software development is sort of has many aspects that require creative work, creativity.
Yeah.
But then, if creativity is so central, so important for software development, where do you see the limitations of software process definitions? If creativity is in the foreground and the key thing in creative work is to provide an atmosphere of freedom where people freely think creatively and sort of have the room to evolve their ideas, how do these two interact, and how much freedom is necessary inside a software development process?
Yeah. Difficult to answer, actually. Yes, I think you have to give the people who do software development freedom to bring in their creativity, their intelligence, their experience, actually. I mean, it doesn't make much sense to get some highly paid software developments with years of experience, and afterwards just let them code down for loops anyone or other guy has defined. So free the creativity of the people and free the intelligence of the people. Nevertheless, if your team grows larger, you will end up with a mess when everybody can do everything without at least a defined way how to communicate and when to communicate. I mean, then you have really everybody has to talk to everybody before doing anything, and communication costs grow exponentially, and that's a huge problem. So it's like balancing out the two factors. So and that's one of the points why all we talked about fitting processes to actually projects. The team size and all these things are influential factors to get the right process and to customize your process. It's always a balancing act, and someone has to do it in front up or while the project. I mean, you can also do some kind of meta software development process where you correct your software development process every iteration or something like that. So it doesn't have to be front up, of course.
Actually, much of what you're saying now reminds me of the Agile Manifesto that Jutta Eckstein mentioned in her interview about agile software development. Sort of like have the minimum formalism that is necessary to keep things going, but no more than this minimum. Would you say that every software development process should be agile?
The question is it's a tricky question, actually. First of all, Agile is not so well defined in my opinion. I mean, we have the Agile Manifesto, which doesn't say so much about actual processes. So, what is Agile and what is not Agile is sometimes more a marketing thing than anything else. So, but yes, I would say, any process process developer, process designer should look into Agile process because there is a lot of truth and a lot of experience in there. If your end product is a Agile process or not, may lay in the eye of the beholder, but, it's a difficult question, you see?
Yeah, I see that. I mean, sure, Agile is not really hard and well defined, but Agile is about a value system.
Yeah.
And would you say that this value system, these ideas, I mean, no matter whether you want to call it Agile or not, I mean, there are political reasons, all kinds of reasons whether to call it Agile or not.
Yeah.
But, putting aside these political issues, would you say that every process should or could, be Agile? Is that something to aim for? Or do you see same limitations where these Agile values are not applicable?
I don't see any limitations for the values, actually. I see limitations for the processes some people did. I mean, I wouldn't do extreme programming for any kind of project, but this is a comment I would say for any process out there. So it's not something against extreme programming, actually. But the values you said, I mean,
you wouldn't do it for every project.
Yeah, exactly. The values in there to focus on the people, to focus on communication, to don't overvalue the process at all, are absolutely true. I think they should be valued actually by any development process designer. Yes.
Okay, so basically the process is not something to be cultivated for its own end means, but it's just a means to an end to get things going. And so it should be as lean as possible, and get out of the way as much as possible should define the minimum of a structure that is needed.
Yeah. But that's of course a difficult thing for the actual project manager afterwards. I mean, you have to find a balance again between, not letting the process get in your way. On the other hand, if you just get it out of the way every time, you will end up with a team that doesn't follow the process anywhere. So it's really a difficult thing for a project manager to balance this out, but the value is absolutely true there.
Okay. Well, another thing that you mentioned is incremental software development. How important do you think that is?
Absolutely important. I mean, I don't think waterfall processes work for any non-trivial project. Waterfall basically meaning you gather all the requirements, then do all the designer architecture work, then do all the coding, and afterwards just test it and release it. So that doesn't work for anything more complex than Hello World. So to develop incremental and iterative is absolutely essential. And this is also the huge difference between the defined and empiric processes. You always find some kind of increments in empiric processes. Some call them prototypes in other industries or customer servers or whatever. They are quite different in different branches, but the notion is there everywhere where you have empiric processes. So yes, it's absolutely essential.
One thing that I have always been wondering, people speak of incremental and iterative development processes. What is the difference between these?
Okay. I also searched a lot for this because different people have different notions on this. Actually, some say iterations are the time boxes and increments are the release steps where you add functionality. But there are also other interpretations of these two words out there. So I'm not sure if there is an real hard definition for it, or if it's just some soft or misinterpreted thing. I don't know actually.
Okay, but now you mentioned both increments in the requirements and also time boxes. Maybe we should explain a little about what iterative incremental software development actually is, what it's all about.
Yeah. Idea is actually to get feedback as soon as possible, and you have other benefits too, but the main idea is you develop a part of your software, release it to whatever, best case, of course, customer, because he can give you the most definitive feedback on your software. So get the feedback, and then in the next increment or iteration, whatever, develop the next part. So you have already feedback for the customer. You don't do any unnecessary work before. I mean the other way to do it is you gather all the requirements front up and do all the architecture work front up, but you just can't get feedback in this process from your running software. Customers always react on your prototypes, on your iteration results, and they learn with you together. So it's hard to really do front up design. It's nearly impossible complex things because everybody learns. You learn as a software developer and the customer also learns, and you incorporate this feedback in time boxes or in iterations, and therefore you try to minimize any unnecessary work. Mm-hmm. And that's how you get to your full product, of course, because increment after increment, you release more software until the customer is actually happy and says, okay, that's it. Fine. I can work with this software.
So if you sort of gather all the requirements up front and then define milestones in between, and have a master plan that is signed off before the coding has begun, which features go into which milestone would not be incremental software development.
Also controversial point. I mean, the first times I heard about RUP, Rational Unified Process, it looked very much like what you told me right now. I mean, they had these milestones, notions, and stuff like that. They became more iteration focused afterwards, at least in my notion. I would say if you can correct any time in your project, your course, you might be on the right side. So if you use your first milestone to get feedback and change your direction, it's okay.
So feedback and incorporating the feedback and the experience is the key thing. And the more flexible you are upfront, the less it costs to incorporate feedback later.
Mm-hmm. Actually, that's I guess that's where the word agile comes from, to react, to be agile and react on feedback on changing environments, whatever. I mean, if you really worked on a huge project, I mean, actually the world doesn't stop while you do software development. And if you do a 24-month project, actually it looks a lot different than when you started. So you have to change your course usually on huge projects. You have no way out around it.
Mm-hmm. How long would you suggest to make your increments?
Let's stay with the iterations here because let's definitively speak on the time boxes, when to do, integration and get it out to the customer for feedback. A lot of discussion actually out there right now, because many of the agile people think 1 or 2 weeks is best fitting idea. In my experience, it might be a bit short, especially 1 week. So in the project I actually work right now on, we use 4 weeks, 4-week iterations, which work pretty good. And we will change it to 2 weeks iterations as we get closer to the end of development to get more feedback, because we can incorporate more customers and get more things out of them. So, 4 weeks is okay. Some process actually say up to 8 weeks, which is a bit long in my opinion.
Okay, so anywhere from 1 to maybe 8 weeks, but anyway, a couple of weeks, and not counting in months or let's say half a year or something like that.
Exactly. And 1 week is actually for the pretty hardcore extreme programmers. It's very short, 1 week, but it works.
How much effort should one put into the upfront activities before you actually start your first iteration?
I would answer, I can't answer this question. The point is, it depends so much on different things. For example, if you do a project in a field you've done many projects before, which basically means you know the architecture of the thing, you know the technologies you use, and all these things are pretty clear to you. You can jump right into development without any front-up work, which is pretty extreme actually, but it can work. Actually, I've done this and it worked very well.
But you need to spend some time gathering requirements.
Yes and no. As I said, I did this once, and I used extreme programming actually on this project, which means you have your on-site customer, and you do it on the fly, more or less. So yes, you have to find some basic stories and talk about it, and of course you have some phase front up where you do all the business stuff. You have to define how many people are on the project, and you talk about the project and the contents and requirements there too. So it's not really fair to say start on day 0. So with coding. But nevertheless, it's almost without any front up work. So, but there are other projects out there too.
Obviously for some, if the domain is new, you need to spend some time.
Domain is new, technology may be a huge step. I mean, if you do your first .NET or Java or whatever thing, and you have to do some serious research before you actually plan your project and who you need and how to do it and whatever. So it depends very, very much on how unknown the territory is of the project you do. And this might lead to some month of work. I would say if you have more than 2 or 3 months front up work, you're in trouble too. Somehow, I mean, either you have the wrong experts on your project or whatever. But it's it's a smell, I would say. So, might be good, but usually it's some kind of problem.
Okay, then you suggested rather short iterations, couple of weeks, and have some sort of release at the end of each iteration. I mean, finishing some software to be able to hand it off as a release requires additional effort, like testing, like creating install scripts and that sort of thing. How much overhead, or what part of the time in your experience does one spend on these overhead activities as opposed to the actual development?
Tricky answer. If you do it like the way I described, if you release very, very often, and very, very often means for example, once a month or once a week even, it goes other way around. Your whole team minimizes the effort to do these integrations. They automate all the scripts necessary for installation and stuff like that. So it gets less and less effort. And this is actually good, because integration is a huge danger in a larger project, because you shift all the work to the end of your whatever, to your first milestone or whatever your first release might be. And usually projects break at these points. because then it's so much that's not done, and we do it at the first milestone release, that you have no way to actually do it in a very reasonable time. So I would say it's a bit different. If you would do it the normal way, every iteration, you would have a problem because it's too much work, too much overhead. But you do all your design decisions and all your build scripts and all your stuff you need for this will be optimized for frequent releases. And if you do something like extreme programming, where you have your on-site customer who actually tests all the day, or that's not his main business, but he will actually do it, you have integration anytime in your project. So work to be runnable as often as possible, actually.
But still, even if you automate the actual integration and the installation things, there's still testing to be done. If at least for a normal release that should go out to the customers. What level of quality would you suggest to try to achieve if you make this sort of frequent releases?
Okay, the religious answer would be release quality anytime in your project, because everything else will bite you in the ass at the end of the project. So this would be the answer from the book. My life doesn't is as easy, actually. So you have to find a compromise there.
For big projects, you can spend I've seen weeks or even months spent in testing after the development was finished to ensure high quality. You can't do that if you release every second week.
To give you an idea, I work on a 50-person project right now, something about 50, a bit more. And we have 10 testers all the time doing tests, integration tests, and, iteration end tests, something like that. We call it a bit different, but nevertheless, they work all the day just for this. So it's 20% of the effort, of the project effort in testing all over the time.
And how much time do they get for a, let's say, programming freeze to ensure the quality for a release?
We, these 10 people do 1 week a month. 1 week a month, 10 persons, for these iteration end tests. And the developers fix a bit of the stuff they actually find, but most of this will be shifted into the normal iteration planning stuff.
So actually development stops 1 week before this iteration release?
No, we do it different. We stop at the iteration release is okay. Iteration end, we have iteration end. So developers stop to work on the iteration, and we in parallel begin iteration planning of the next iteration and these iteration tests, actually. So they run parallel and for just about 1 week, something like that. And then everything, starts again.
Okay.
But also, this is, the project I work on is a very complicated, very complicated project. You might get away with much less effort if your project is simpler or more standard in some kind of way. So, as always, all the numbers I say depends heavily on your project. So don't take the numbers and simply use it as a benchmark or something for your project.
Yeah. Well, I guess that the actual development processes that are out there in the literature go into more detail on this, and you probably should choose the process that actually fits your requirements for complexity, for size, for whatever. So what are some starting points? What are the most frequently used processes, the ones that are most worthy of being starting points for reading things up?
The different hierarchies. The most used, I would say, are customized processes. At least in my experience, almost any time I get into a company, they don't use some off-the-shelf process. Some better should, but nevertheless, they have some customized process. I have no idea actually if there are more extreme programmers or rational unified process people out there. I guess RUP is huge because a lot of huge companies actually use it. CMMI is not a process, so I wouldn't count it in here. Okay. For what you have or should look into depends on your project size. I think you should look at least into one of the classic processes, something like rational unified process, or if you work for some for some public service things, they also have rules which process you have to use. In Germany, for example, we have the V-Modell. For if you work for the government, so you have to look into this, but also take a look into the newer agile methods, because even if you don't end with using one of them, extreme programming is good to look at it, in my opinion. You should also look in feature-driven development and Scrum, which is not really a software development process. Nevertheless, it's very good. You should take a look at it. And with a mixture of it, you have a pretty complete picture and build your own process, I guess. Nevertheless, process development or customization is a thing someone should do who has experience with it. I wouldn't really recommend it after reading just a few books or without any prior software development experience. Actually, I know some people who define software development processes and never really did software development process. Software development. It's not a good idea, in my opinion. You have to know how it feels.
It's probably the same as everywhere. If you start, just follow the rules, and once you get the experience, you can break the rules, but that's not where you should start. So.
Also one comment. If you look at the different processes, always take a look who wrote the process. If you look at something like extreme programming, I would say it's a process a developer wrote with all the pros and cons of it. I mean, it has some advantages because it's very development focused. It has also disadvantages because a lot of things are missing. Same for RUP, where rational unified process almost ends when it goes to software development. It does everything but software development. So always keep in mind or try to understand who wrote this process. It helps a lot.
So let's say one of our listeners is a software developer with some experience and is about to embark on his or her first, let's say, small-sized project management role. Let's say 5 people, half a year. What would be your short list of suggestions for her?
So in kind of, or the question was which development processes or what?
Well, actually, let's say someone starts tomorrow. Or next week, let's say.
Okay.
And what would be your short list of advice for this person?
Okay. First of all, get the extreme programming book. It's full. Extreme programming has some huge advantage to me. It's a minimal software development process in some respect. I mean, you can't take away a single development technique out of extreme programming without getting into trouble. You can replace it with something future or whatever, but you can't take away anything. So it's kind of the core of software development processes. The project you described pretty much fits the hotspot of extreme programming. So I would say take a look at this one as soon as you can do, because there are a lot of good advices in there, from unit testing to whatever. Then listen to your team. Always keep in mind the process is not the thing. The people are the thing are the most important success factor in your project. So especially if you have some people who are very experienced, listen to them, use their experience. These would be the 2 most important ideas I would give them.
Okay, great. Then I suggest I summarize what we covered here. I think the first key point is that every team, every software development project needs to have a software development process. I mean, either they have a documented one they follow, or they have some sort of culture and things that are done, but it's not documented, it's implicit, and implicit is usually worse than explicit in this regard. Then we saw that there's a huge variety of different processes out there, and they fit different kinds of projects with regard to size, with regard to time, with regard to complexity in lots of different ways. So you should get an overview in the long run anyway, and then pick the one that fits your needs best and customize it. If you have the experience, customize it to your needs, to your project. And, well, then, finally, don't overrate the formalistic aspect. Keep in mind that you're dealing with an empiric process rather than a defined process. So don't go for absolute complete control, because software development is creative work. It is not repeatable in the sense that a production line is repeatable. That would be my assessment of the things we covered here.
Yeah, nice.
Would you like to add anything?
No, pretty complete. Good summary.
Okay, so we covered the basic aspects of software development processes in this episode. It's a huge area. Give feedback, make suggestions for things you'd like us to go into more detail about, and we'll go into different processes and different topics in future episodes. And that's about it. Thanks for listening, and goodbye.
This was another episode of Software Engineering Radio. The Software Engineering Radio team wants to thank Henning Pauli for providing the music, as well as Libsyn.com for hosting and bandwidth. For more information on the podcast, past episodes and feedback, go to se-radio.net.